Hi, good afternoon, and good morning, good evening, wherever you are in this part of the world. This is Sucheta Ravel with Travel Talk. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today, I will be talking about traveling solo versus in a group. So, if you have contemplated tr- taking your next destination, your next trip, and can't decide whether I should go with a group or with whether you should travel alone, book it through a travel agency, or maybe do it all on your own, you've come to the right place. Today, we will be talking a little bit about all of that. And during this webcast, if you have any questions, make sure you post them on the right side of the screen or underneath where you see the comments section. So let's get started. I'm so excited to share this with you. When I was in my late 20s, that's when I really started traveling alone. I know it's not been a long time, and I've been to over 80 countries since then. But my first trip was actually in my late 20s, and I told my husband I wanted to go to Dubai to see some of my relatives. My sister in law just had a baby, and he was really surprised because up until that point, I never traveled alone. And a lot of times he would tell me to go and visit my friends or relatives, go to India. And I would say, no, I don't like traveling alone. I don't want to go anywhere. So I did that trip, and which was also visiting family. So it wasn't really being alone the whole time. But it gave me a little bit of confidence that I can travel without my spouse, without my family. And then the second trip I took was to Russia, where I traveled again by myself, but I met up with a group of volunteers who had come from all over the world to work with an organization called Cross Cultural Solutions. And we did different programs through the day, including sightseeing, volunteering, and stayed in a house where we had home hosted meals. And it was a good way to have a balance of you're traveling alone, meaning you're not with your friends, your family, but you're still not alone. You have the company of other people that you just met. Now, I really like that style of traveling. And, a lot of times you want to go somewhere, but your friends are not available to go during that time, or your schedules are not matching up, your interests are not matching up, and you're like, what the hell, I'm just going to go. So Morocco was one of these destinations. I really wanted to go there. And I took a trip for 3 weeks. Obviously, a lot of people I know could not take off for that long. So I took the trip by myself, but I also recruited some friends of friends to come and join me. So it ended up becoming a trip where I sort of knew a couple of people, but I had really not met them before. And then I met up with 22 people who were staying in this house, part of this volunteer vacation that we were doing in Morocco. And that's when I really realized a lot of things about myself. One of the things was, we had to share this house with 22 people with, I think there were 3 bathrooms, and I was sleeping in a bunk bed, which I've never done in my life. And just being around people all the time, it was something different from me because I've been the only child and grew up having the entire place to myself. And even when I traveled otherwise, it was just having my own room or just with my spouse. And sharing was completely different in this aspect, a part of travel that I realized on that trip that I could do it. And I enjoyed it when I was there, but also I respected my privacy and having my own place. But that gave birth to my organization, Go Eat Give, because at that point I realized how there were more people like me who wanted to travel in a group, but they also wanted their own privacy. So Go Eat Give concept became where you would join a trip as an individual or in a pair or with your friends, but then you'll have your own room. There'll be certain tours you would do during the day. You'll also experience the local culture and go sightseeing. but you'll have some evenings to yourself where you can stay in your room, or you can go have a dinner, explore the city on your own. So that's the concept of Go Eat Give that I kind of made up from my different travels and put the things that I liked the best together. Now, obviously, Go Eat Give trips are designed to be group trips, but we have done a lot of individual trips as well. So if you and your friend want to go somewhere, we can also design that trip. Now, I wanted to talk about some of the pros and cons of traveling solo versus in a group. The first one is very obvious. It's the budget, right? It's always cheaper to go in a group because the tour operators have negotiated group rates. So you will get cheaper package price versus if you were to pay something, your hotel, your tours, your guides, your taxis, everything on your own. It will be reasonably more expensive. And it's also cheaper to share a room. If you have a friend who can split the cost of a room, it will definitely come out to be cheaper. If you're splitting a cab, it's cheaper. And then if you're hiring a guide, hiring a guide for one person is the same as hiring it for 5 people. So you have to still pay them the same amount. So it tends to be a little more expensive to travel alone. But I also know people who stay in hostels, who do home hosted stays, do Airbnbs, or they go on walking tours, the free walking tours, or just explore on their own and take a bus. So there are cheaper ways to do that. All else being equal, I think group travel is still, for the luxury travelers, it's a little bit more reasonable. The second thing that I find to be a huge difference in the way I have traveled in a group versus by myself is meeting people. So one of the things I enjoy most when I travel is talking to locals and understanding the culture from their standpoint. And when I'm by myself, I feel like even if I'm in a bus or I'm in a restaurant, people would come up to me and talk to me, seeing that I'm alone. And even bartenders, restaurateurs, hotel owners, they will be more friendly towards me if they see that there's a girl who's by herself. And it would strike a conversation which would lead to maybe them sharing with me their favorite restaurant or inviting me over for dinner or spending more time with me. And I end up learning a lot more about their culture that ways. And if I'm with my partner or with my friends, then it's a little bit more difficult. People don't approach you because they know you're maybe on a romantic trip or you already have a group of friends. So it's not the easiest way to do that. But I was in a tour to Egypt one time. It was a group trip, and my husband and I were part of maybe 15 people on this trip, and we didn't know anyone. We just joined the trip from New York, and we met so many people. They happened to be a lot of them Indians. We got along really well for the 10 days we were together, and it was fun because otherwise, I may not have met a lot of locals there. But I am in touch with only one person from that trip. So even though we spent so much time together, we really did not make that long-lasting friendships. On the other hand, when I was in Seoul, South Korea, I stayed with a couch surfer for 5 days, and we went out for some dinners and did some walking around the city, and I'm still friends with him till today, which has been a long time. So it just depends who you meet and how open they are to keeping in touch and all. Driving, I think, is the second thing that is most nerve-wracking for me, aside from overnight travel. Overnight bus and train travels, I don't really prefer doing them by myself because you always have to watch your luggage. You can't leave your purse if you have to go to the restroom. So that's something I always wish that there was a companion or somebody to watch my luggage for me. But even driving, I was in Croatia last year, and the moment I landed in Zagreb, I had to pick up a rental car from the airport, which it was already 10 or 11 at night. And then I had to drive an hour to my next destination in Samobor. And this is the first time I was in Croatia. It was dark. I was by myself, and I had to drive to my destination. And I felt like those kind of times I feel I would like to have a partner, to just feel that you have somebody who's looking at the GPS and somebody else who's navigating and driving, so I'm not doing it all at the same time. Another thing I see challenging, most people find this to be the most challenging, believe it or not, is dining alone. Yeah. How many times have you been to a restaurant and you've seen this one person sitting by themselves, eating, enjoying their food, their wine, and you're like, oh, poor thing, he doesn't have a companion there. Well, it's again, there's pros and cons to that. Dining alone, yeah, can be boring sometimes. Thankfully, you have Wi-Fi everywhere, so you can always FaceTime or talk to somebody, text your friends. But I also find it's a great time to look around, observe, talk to people. Again, it depends on the situation. I was in Positano in Italy, overlooking the Amalfi Coast, and having dinner at this beautiful Villa Franca with a balcony. And I was there by myself. So I was the only person who was having dinner at this wonderful seafood restaurant. Everybody else there were couples. So obviously, I'm not going to get up and start talking to them. And that was really boring for me to do. But then I've been to restaurants in other places where you can grab a seat at the bar and talk to other people who are sitting at the bar or to the bartender. And that's how you can strike a conversation and make other friends. Another tip I'll tell you is some of the high-end restaurants, you can't get a last-minute reservation. But if you're going by yourself to eat, there's a good chance that they will give you a seat. Maybe it's at the bar, but it's a better way to get in. Well, the other challenge of eating out alone, I'll tell you, is in the Japanese countryside. So I was on this Walk Japan tour in western part of Japan, and the places we were going to, they were very rural. They were in the countryside, and we were staying in the ryokans, hiking through the day, and then in the evenings we would eat at the ryokan or a local restaurant. And there was nothing written in English. The menus were Japanese. The people didn't speak English, and if I did not have a guide, I would be totally lost, and I would not be able to eat anything. So at that time, it was great to have this local tour operator who had arranged for our group trip. And there were only 3 people in our group. But then we also had a guide who had already ordered the food for us. And he would also translate on our behalf when we would eat at the restaurants. So that's when group trips and organized agent trips really come in handy. Now, with sightseeing, have you been with people who are like, I want to do this, but then others want to do something else, and you end up just arguing about it, and sometimes you're dragged into something you don't want to do, or everybody goes their own way. Now, as a solo traveler, you can totally change things around on a whim. And I have been on trips where I wake up in the morning and I think about what I want to do today. And maybe something just came up last night in a conversation, and they're like, oh, you should go check out this food market because, I like food. And I would just wake up and go there. And there would be no plans. After that, I may walk around some neighborhoods, and maybe I would eat lunch or a gelato for lunch, and then keep walking around till I'm tired and maybe take a nap in the afternoon. But if I was with people, I would have to follow a set itinerary and not have so much flexibility to do what I would like to do. Now, I was on a food tour in Tuscany, in Italy, a few years back, and that was a good way for me to also get a feel for how the group trips work, because we were about 10 food and travel writers. And the great thing about that was we were staying in this farm, so it was very remote. I think if I had stayed there by myself, I would be really bored. The nearest city was an hour drive, and I didn't have a car there. So I would be totally in the wilderness, which is great if you just want to think and write or do something more meditative. But I think I would have been bored staying there by myself for a week. So we had 10 people on our tour, and there was always company. And these were like-minded people. So we were all interested in food and travel. And we would hang out in the house, sit by the fireplace, go for a walk, maybe in pairs of twos and threes, go for a coffee. And I think that was a good way to also experience some of the wilderness part of travel. Obviously, you have to think about where you're going to and what is your intention of this trip before you decide which kind of travel style works best for you. I had really hesitated going to all-inclusive resorts and island-style vacations, beach trips by myself. But there was a trip my husband couldn't make it to, and nobody else was available to go. And so I went to Bonaire a couple of years ago, and I wanted to see the carnival there too. So I stayed on the beach, and I just felt like, that's a trip that you do with your companion, with some friends. But then I became friends with the tour guide, with the owner of the hotel I was staying with, and I never ate alone. There were always people joining me. They were taking me on boat trips. They were taking me to see the scenic points. And even though I felt this vacation was not going to be the best in terms of traveling solo, it turned out to be one of the most memorable ones. If you're going hiking, I think that's a good one where you need to take people with you just for safety and for companionship. But I've also done a hiking trip to Japan where I did a Yamabushi spiritual experience where you were not allowed to speak for 5 days. And at that point, you don't want friends around because they will tempt you to speak. It's a meditative spiritual journey, which you need to be following on your own. So I think traveling alone for me, what it's meant is becoming more comfortable with myself. I don't now ever feel bored if I'm left alone, whether it's in the house or when I'm traveling abroad. I also feel more empowered to deal with situations such as delays and being stuck somewhere for days, which I have, or being in a bus overnight in the Middle East, or having to deal with flight cancellations or dealing with customer service people. And even hotels, where you feel like you're not having the best experience, but then there's nobody else you can complain to or talk to about it. And you just dig more deeper into yourself and find out, why are you doing this and how is this going to make you a better person? So I hope you got some insights into traveling alone versus in a group. Like I said, there is a time for both, and you should definitely try all kinds of travel and find what works for you. And maybe different things work for you in different points in your life. And if you have any questions about traveling with me, with Go Eat Give, or traveling to one of the destinations that I have been to, feel free to send me an email, sucheta@goeatgive.com, or leave a comment at the end of this stream. Well, thank you for joining me. And next week, March 13th, I'm going to be talking about writing. So specifically writing your own books. So if you're ever interested in being an author, turning your story into a book, join me next week, same time, same place on YouTube Live. Thanks and have a great day.